Brian and Jannelle here with you, and so pleased to welcome back to the show our regular contributor and friend, David Williams. He's a speaker and an evangelist. He's also a member of an organization called MAN. It's Men and Abortion Network. And I've participated with him in a panel. I moderated a panel where he talked about how abortion impacts men.
Oh, yeah.
And how it impacted his life.
So it's not talked about enough, yeah.
Definitely not. So we love his passion. David Williams, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good morning. How you guys doing?
Doing great, brother. And, you know, I've noticed something that you've noticed as well here. You know what we're really good at? We're good at noticing how much everybody else needs Jesus around us. Mm-hmm. Man, they need Jesus, don't they, David?
Yeah, and they do. You know, we look at the world and it's absolutely crazy. And, you know, I'm not going to go through all that's going on in the world because most of your listeners know better than I do. But there is, you know, it's becoming more and more evident that we have a world that desperately needs the Lord. And but in that, I think that we have forgotten as God's people just how desperately we need him. And I think because of some of the challenges that we face in our world today, it can almost be as if they need Jesus more than we do. When I think, you know, God's been reminding me that all of us share a common, you know, almost a common story, a common testimony. And it's not about, you know, sometimes I think we can look at our lives and maybe our lives haven't looked as bad on the outside as other people. But it's not about like how shiny our apple was. It's about the fact that every apple in the bunch was rotten to the core. Yeah. And there's a common testimony we share, which I think Paul lays out for us in Ephesians 2, that we need to remember this, that we were a people that were dead. You know, we were unresponsive to God. And it wasn't like one day we just kind of woke up and thought God was the best thing to do and we turned to him. God initiated and moved on us. We were following a world that was hostile to God. We were following the enemy who had taken us captive. So we were enslaved and we were doing his will. And we were disobedient because he was working in us. And it says that was all of our testimony. And all we did was give in to the desires of our flesh that did not want to please God, that wanted to please us and left us in a place of alienation and deserving God's wrath. And for those of us that know God, that's our story, you know. But the mercy of God has broken into our life. The love of God has overwhelmed us. And so we, like them, have that commonality in our story. We've tasted and seen that the Lord is good. And our hearts should be moved to want them to taste and to see that the Lord is good. But we're all kind of in this same boat. And the grace of God has wrecked us, and we should long for the grace of God to wreck our neighbors.
Well, as we grow in our faith and we experience the grace of God, we grow in our love for his righteousness, and that's kind of like what we're impassioned for. And it makes us, like you said, look at the world and think, y'all need Jesus, you need Jesus. So how can you have that passion and then lose the understanding of your own need? Like, shouldn't that not be, or sounds like it shouldn't be mutually exclusive?
Yeah, you're right. It shouldn't. Like we're growing and becoming more righteous, but that's only because of the work of Christ in our own heart. But yet, you know, when we realize like a holy God, what amazes me so much is that the holy God came into this sinful world and he put on humanity, and yet he was without sin, but he didn't run from sin. It was like he ran into sin to come and rescue us. He ran into it so much so that he would bear our sin and he would become our sin and he would die for our sin so that we could be set free from that which separated us from God, so that we now can grow in him. And then he's given us this new life, which we have, but it's his life. So if his life is in me, and that was his passion, then that should be my passion as I'm growing in righteousness. My passion should be to run to others, to present to them this great hope that has transformed my eternal destiny, but is also transforming my life in the way that I live, because there's a new power source within me, and it's not me, it's he who lives in me. And I think that brings us back to even this week when we think about, you know, the death of Christ for our sin, but then him being raised from the grave to give us a new life and to send his spirit. That's the hope we have to take to a world, but we can't forget how hopeless we were, and how even now, how hopeless we are to live in a way that's pleasing to God without his help.
David, there were three things you wanted to look at as we seek this understanding. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I guess one was what I talked about earlier, just the fact that, we have this common testimony. So there's the as much as the world needs the grace of God, we needed it. We've tasted it. And so there's no separation. So there's not us as we look at the world kind of looking down at them and, thinking that we're better, because we were in the same boat. And
Yes.
It's only because God has taken the initiation, brought us to himself. And the second is just the grace that we need daily to live this new life that he has given us. It's like we've been given a new life, but this new life is to be living for him, for his glory, for his purpose, for his will. It's not for us to do what we want, to be comfortable. And so the Christian life is, it's hard. Yeah. And it's not one like, Jannelle, and Brian, we have kids and we're raising them up, and we're raising our kids to be independent of us. But as we walk with the Lord, I think, sometimes we can think like as we walk with the Lord more, like I don't need him as much. Yeah. And it's like the truth is I need him more than I needed him, before. It's like every day, even though I've been free from, God has given me power that I don't have to give into my flesh. I don't have to follow the world, or I don't have to be under the tutelage of Satan. Those things are still real. My flesh still wants to do everything it wanted to do before. It wants to please itself, satisfy itself. It wants to do what it wants to do. There's a world that's telling me to run in this direction, and this is the way you need to go. And I'm constantly bombarded with his messages. The enemy now has a target on my back because I was his prisoner, and now I'm free, and I can be used by God to bring others out of his clutches. So he has ramped up his attack against us. And so it's like I need the Lord every single day to walk through circumstances and situations, because apart from him, I can't do it. But if I'm not depending on the Lord and realizing what he's done for me to bring me to this place, and how desperately I need him every single day, when I step out into the midst of a world that does desperately need Jesus, if I began to look to other things to think that it's going to help to get me what I need in life, then I'm not going to take to people what they desperately need. Yeah. They don't need stimulus checks. They don't need vaccines. They don't need racism to end. What they need is the renovation of their soul, a radical transformation by God. They need salvation and a hope that doesn't perish. They need joy that can carry them through the hardest of circumstances. They need peace when their whole world is falling apart, and nothing but Jesus can give that to them. But if that's not how I'm living, and that's not what I'm looking to, then my mindset isn't looking at a world thinking that I want them to taste and see the goodness of the Lord that I'm experiencing every day. And sometimes I think we're living below our birthright. So when we fail to embrace that grace that saved us from the penalty of sin, that grace that is saving us from the power of sin, and that grace that one day will lead us safely to his presence, and that is not the forefront of our life, then we fail to really display Christ to a world that needs him, and we fail to really take Christ to this world with our words and with our lives. So those are the three things I wanted to just lay out.
Fantastic. We love your passion for Christ and your good reminder about what I would call the counterintuitive nature of spiritual maturity. So often in life, the more you mature, the more independent you become. I see it, the more mature you come in your love for Christ, the more dependent you become on him. Would you agree with that idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you tell?
I have a friend. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, okay, so people could be listening to this and thinking, okay, I get that intellectually, but I'm not there. We don't say this out loud at church. We don't say it out loud at Bible study. But especially if you've been a Christian for a long time, it's kind of like marriage. You don't feel that like the bubbles, or what did they call the butterflies that you used to feel in the beginning.
The tangles.
Right. And you want that. So what do you do if you're hearing this and feeling that?
Yeah, I think, when we recognize that we have allowed other things to maybe take the place that only Christ can have, and and we're looking at other things to give us what we truly need, and he's really all we need, then it comes to the place of confessing that before him. And then the other thing is just, in order to even have the desire for the Lord, like sometimes I think we have to muster up the desire for God. I can't even do that. It's like I am so utterly helpless. I need God to give me a desire for him. And if he doesn't, then it's so easy for me to just go in and follow the lust of my flesh and give into this world and listen to the lies of the enemy. And so it's asking God to make his strength perfect in me who is weak. I am utterly weak. And I think we have a world where even as Christians, we think that outwardly we need to have it all together. We need to have the perfect polished resume. And we never really act as if we got weaknesses. And God runs to us in our weaknesses. God is near the brokenhearted. God makes his strength perfect in our weakness. But if we act like everything is okay and we don't recognize that desperate need for God, and we're not crying out to him and inviting him to come into those spaces and to cause his grace to just overflow us, that we can, even in spite of wanting to give up and wanting to quit, and it's too hard and it's too overwhelming. I mean, I'm walking through circumstances right now that if I in the natural looked at, they're just overwhelming. Today is my mom's birthday. My mom died 10 years ago, and I'm reminded and died very suddenly. My aunt just died last week from complications of COVID-19.
So
she was my mom's best friend. I'm in the midst of preparing a eulogy to speak to my family. My wife has been walking through health issues for the past few months and going to doctors, and nobody knows what's going on with her. We're in the midst of we just sold our house and we're living in temporary housing. And my kids are going crazy because it's like our whole world has been turned upside down. Yeah. And if it were me trying to figure all these things out on my own, man, I can't do it. I need the grace of God to meet me in this place. Would I like for him to change my circumstances? Absolutely. And I think often as Christians, that's what we're like, God, come on, change this. But I think what God wants to do, because we live in a broken, fallen world and the people around us are facing hard things, he wants to show them that his grace is able to walk us through things we would never be able to walk through on our own, and that we can hold out hope as we still give God praise, as we give him thanks, and still declare his goodness, even in the midst of a fallen world. So I think things don't necessarily change for us outwardly, but God does a radical work in us inwardly that can walk us through it. But it's us constantly asking God to do in us what only he can do, because we can't do it without him. We can't love him without him. Yes. We can't serve him without him. We can't glorify him without. We need him for absolutely everything. So it's inviting him into every space and allowing him to have his way.
David Williams, again, friend of the show, regular contributor, speaker, evangelist. David, if folks want to connect with you about your ministry, how can they learn more?
They can go to my website, davidwilliamsspeaks.com. I'm on Facebook at David Williams Speaks, and they can find me on YouTube at YouTube channel David Williams Speaks as well.
Thanks a lot, brother. I always love spending time with you.